Good morning. The Misinformation Disinformation Bill is an outright attack on your freedom of speech. Joining us today is the lead Senate candidate for the Libertarian Party, Jordan Dittloff, who has dived deep into the mad bill and the social media ban for kids. We have nation states calling us backwards for this bill. Frankly, it scares the shit out of me. Jordan, should we be concerned? And what are these bills actually about, mate?
Yeah, look, what they're about and what they say they're about are two very different things, as you and many watchers of your channel would no doubt be familiar with. So they say they're claiming to try to protect, on the one hand, adults and users of social media platforms from serious harms caused by misinformation or disinformation. So they say that platforms like X are basically filled with dangerous ideas, for want of a better word, and that those ideas have the potential to cause harms in the community that the government wants to protect us from. In other words, they want to protect us from ourselves, from our foolishness, and from our ability to be led astray and, sold lies, other than the lies they want to sell us, I would say. With the social media ban for kids, again, they're sort of taking this thin edge of the wedge approach where they're saying, kids are subject to online harms through social media. And so our solution is we're going to usurp the prerogative of parents, and we're actually going to be the parent to your children, and we're going to come in and basically prevent your children from being able to use social media until they're 17. And that is in itself just, it's so delusional to think that in the modern age where this is the way these kids have grown up, they've grown up watching shows on YouTube, they've grown up with the internet as part of their education and part of their learning, and it's a tool, and it's like their birthright. You know what I mean? You're basically saying, no, we're gonna try to put pause on, and it's not going to work, but it probably is going to pass, the social media ban for kids, unfortunately, because the Liberal Party, on the one hand, they're sort of trying to come in and beat their chest on the mad legislation, which, if you might remember from our previous conversation about it, they originally proposed. So the Liberal Party under Scott Morrison proposed this misinformation, disinformation regime. Then they lost government, and then now that the Albanese government's continuing that policy and trying to implement it, they're saying, "Oh, this is outrageous, and it's the worst bill ever, and we're opposing it." But it was their idea, and the only reason they're opposing it is because they think there's an opportunity to score political points. But they're supporting and opposing censorship at the same time. So that just tells you they have no values, and they're prepared to do whatever they think is convenient or might win them some short-term points. And the problem is too, Sean, that with the social media ban for kids in particular, there are a lot of people out there, and there are a lot of parents who do want this, who are actually asking the government to co-parent with them because it's hard. You know what I mean? Like, rather than say no to their kids, they want to be able to say, well, the government won't let me. Like that's the level we're at as a society, where psychologically we want the government to narrow our choices and to help us navigate difficult conversations.
This is maybe going to be triggering, but how as a country and how as people and adults did we become so spineless to want the government to be able to choose what our kids can and cannot do?
100%. And like, if you think about it through COVID as well, at the end of the day, the community, the general populace wanted the government to protect them from death. Like that's what it was all about at the end of the day. That was at the core of it, was people being so afraid of the unknown or of risk or whatever else that they invited the vampire into their home. You watch movies and you watch horror shows and you scream at the TV, why would you do that? Don't split up. Don't invite the monster into your home. But people do every day. And so I think that we are really up against it. We're fighting a really hard fight on the misinformation, disinformation legislation side of things. And I'm not going too much into like what the bill does mechanically, because we did speak about that once before early on. Just quickly,
just so we don't need to go too deep into it, it's just a total attack on freedom of speech. That's absolutely how I sum it up quickly, but I'll pass it back.
Totally. But no, and what it does is it's basically saying there's certain types of information or ideas that, if they're wrong, have the potential to cause serious harm. And the big problem with that too is that there's all sorts of problems with the bill. But like when you hear the term serious harm, right, you think, well, okay, if it's serious harm for me physically, serious harm would be my arm's hanging off, or I've had a bad car accident or something like that. You think of seriousness as a sliding scale from I've hit my finger and it's a bit bruised to I'm nearly dead, right? You're thinking seriousness on a scale of 0 being not very serious, 100 being very serious. That's not what this bill does. It's not saying, okay, here's a category of harm where if it's a really bad example of that, it's going to trigger this legislation. It's describing serious harm as a category of types of harm that if it goes to that place, it's instantly breaching the bill. So if you have misinformation that is deemed to bring the financial sector into peril, or basically attack the banking system, pretty much, which is how they've worded it. You talking about Bitcoin, talking about the failing of fiat and the failing of central reserve fractional banking, that could be perceived or deemed to be causing serious harm to the financial sector. And once it is that category of misinformation, it is automatically serious harm under the bill. So it's like deemed to be serious if it's about a particular topic, which is really, really worrying because it's like a huge sweeping definition. And on that topic, actually, I sent you a graph yesterday that I wanted to explain to you a little bit, because when we spoke about this when the bill came back, you were like, oh, what's this about that they're sort of trying to run a protection racket for the big four banks? And as part of a conference that I'll be at in Canberra in a couple of weeks, I've been researching banking financial sector regulation. And this graph is the graph of the last 6 years of financial donations declared through the ASC by the big four banks to both major parties. So that's year by year. Each of those lines in each year is how much each of the major banks have basically donated to both of the major parties. And over the 6-year period, it's about 500 grand a year each between both parties from the big four banks, $3.5 million. $3.5 million in political donations to both parties every year. That's what the big four banks are paying for. So they are investing in the major parties and they expect a return on their investment from a policy point of view. So policies like this, which are basically shoring up, the sinking ship and trying to stop rats fleeing it, is absolutely something that the big four banks are paying the major parties to do. And looking at this, this is visual illustration to you and all of your viewers and listeners of why it doesn't matter which of the major parties is in power, because they're basically getting the same donations from the big four banks, from the established players in the finance industry, regardless. So heads you win, tails I lose. That's the game we're in. And the only way to beat that game is to go for option C. And that's what I'm trying to do. Even though option C starts off as one person and one person can only do so much, even just illustrating the sort of stuff we're talking about and making sure that that voice keeps getting heard. And it might be that in a couple of years' time, the only way that that message can be heard is through parliamentary privilege.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. So the MAD bill, it's been moving along pretty quickly, and I want to really focus on that. But first, the social media ban, coming back for a moment. Okay, so we've gotten to a point where parents feel disempowered. They're not willing to do the hard things. They want the government to, I don't know, co-parents their child for whatever reason, which is sad. But for myself personally, Jordan, I didn't do that great at school. It just didn't excite me. It didn't engage me. It wasn't the way that I learned. Everything that I've achieved in my life, not everything, but I have to thank a huge part for YouTube and just having access to the best and brightest minds, and this revolution that we're in with AI and stuff, to be able to take away such powerful tools from people as they're developing, that's going to put children at such a disadvantage on the global scale, as one thing. And then they're still being fed the lies, the pillars of social control: money, education, food, and whatever that fourth one is. But with education, if they're only getting their information from government-sponsored programs. Is this just designed to keep people like in their lane, to not think outside the box and later down the track? Because like in 20 years, these kids are going to be full-blown adults, but potentially not able to think for themselves or to be able to see opposing ideas and to be able to discuss. Like, yes, X can be a cesspit at many times, but it allows discourse. It allows opposing views. The community notes work pretty well. Just to be able to ban people totally from that, that's one thing. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And the second thing is, like, how do they oppose a bill on 16-year-old kids without giving everyone else a digital ID?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'll answer the second question first. They can't. There's no way. You can't start with an exclusion. You can't start with a group you want to exempt. You have to actually test everyone. So for them to enforce a social media ban on children, everybody will need to verify their age. There's no way around that. It's impossible for the system to work, and that's been even admitted by experts in Senate inquiries over recent weeks. You saw David Shoebridge from the Greens, and again, the Greens are not a party I agree with on a lot of things, but they've been pretty good on this stuff, actually. And I think it's partly because they can see the wheels turning, and if Dutton gets into power and the Conservative sort of Liberal Party side of things has control of these weapons, essentially, which is what they are, they're going to be used against people who are protesting about Gaza, people who are protesting about the issues the Greens are concerned about. And it's also going to give a free pass to the Murdoch press, right? Because they're covered by the exemption for professional journalism. So, the Greens sort of, I think, are starting to realise, like, oh, actually, this isn't just something that we can kind of use to sort of silence voices we disagree with. This will eventually be used against us. So, yeah, so absolutely, there's no possible way to implement the social media ban for kids without treating us all like children and requiring us to verify our ID. Now, that might be a backdoor for the digital ID that has recently been passed, which we've been told to be voluntary, and which at the time I said very clearly would be voluntary in the sense that the internet is voluntary. It's obviously not mandatory to use the internet, but your life without the internet would be a completely different world. And so they're adding these thresholds or barriers to access that in order to participate in your life as you know it now, you're going to need to get a digital ID potentially. The other alternative is even more frightening, I think, where they might farm out the digital they might farm out the ID and age verification to third parties, like third-party providers or systems you might have to go through. And that's even worse because that's all the negatives with the added risk of being a honeypot for hackers and other breaches of privacy. So going to your first question, I think like the starting point for this has to be we're already failing. Kids in the Australian education system are graduating with a year 8 reading level. Like that's where we're at now. It's insane. We are falling so far behind in our, not just objectively within the standards we set for ourselves in the country, but within the region. Like, we're competing against the best in the world. And the best in the world are not going to stay in Australia. If they're able to still pull themselves up out of the pot that we're creating through the policy settings we're implementing, if we still have, like Australia statistically would surely have an Elon Musk or people of that caliber, but they're not going to be in Australia. They're not going to stay here. Why would they? And so that's the starting point, is we're already failing. And then on top of that, the government's proposing to even further narrow the types of, like, they're basically trying to prevent people from developing critical thought. That's the summary or the essence of everything you were just saying. Like, they're trying to attack our very ability to question their narratives because they don't like being questioned. And I agree with you. There's a lot of stuff on X and online that is bad or worrying or harmful. But that's the world. Like, you and I have both lived a life where we've seen the world is not a pretty, beautiful place that you can wrap in cotton wool. And if we try to insulate our kids from these things and force them to delay developing the skills and mental muscles to deal with the world as it is and to actually discern and to say, is this something I should trust or someone I should trust? If you're saying that kids can't start learning that until they're 17, what else is going on in a kid's life at 17? They're discovering themselves sexually. They're discovering who they are as a person. If you're preventing them from engaging with risk before that point The first time they're going to be allowed to engage with risk online is at the riskiest time of their life, when they're not going to want any supervision or any oversight. And you're basically telling them they don't need it after age 16. When you think about it that way, you're saying like, okay, up until 16, training wheels are on. After 17, when now still you have notional parental supervision. What 17-year-old is going to say, well, now I can use social media. I'm going to listen to what you think I should do, mum and dad. No,
Yeah.
I absolutely wouldn't have. And it's just a completely misconceived idea that you can sanitize and insulate everything in the world to remove all risk. And it's kind of like you see it in everything. It's like we're living in an age where it's like the modern day Puritan, right? This sort of pearl clutching, won't someone think of the children thing, is just a desire to curate a world that is free of anything uncomfortable, whether it be ideas. You see on X all the people moving to blue sky and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh no, someone help. Like, if you need a world where you're not challenged or uncomfortable at all, then that's what world is that? It's not the real world, that's for sure.
There's a saying that I say to myself every day: when you do what is hard, your life will be easy. But if you do what is easy, your life will be hard. And like you were saying, they're just not allowing people to face adversity or think critically. I've got this video, and for everyone from overseas that's tuning in, this is no. Yes, it is the main one. Yes, it is the main one.
Yeah.
This is absolutely insane. So this is the head honcho here in Australia. He's the ringleader of the circus that we have going on. But a lot of this information, like I just want everyone to take a moment and listen to why he's so passionate about banning freedom of speech, because the dude doesn't like memes.
Social media platforms have a responsibility to make sure that misinformation isn't got out there. I noticed today, for example, on the way up here, they've removed various sites that were up containing fake images of myself superimposed on other people. That's the sort of thing that is going on social media. Social media has a responsibility to do the right thing here.
Oh no! Like, that's terrible, man.
Oh my god! Somewhere, someone on the internet is making fun of me, and but just before we revel in that, which is glorious, like I was thinking about it when you were describing the issue before as well. And you were talking about like health and food. Like there will absolutely be a push. The next push will be, whether it's a Labor government or even a Liberal government will be vulnerable to this, will be controlling what you can buy your kids for food, right? That is the next absolute, like if you accept that the government can co-parent when it comes to what your kids can consume in terms of information, then you accept that the government can control and co-parent with you what your kids can consume in terms of food. And the logic's exactly the same. The parents go, oh, well, I know this stuff's unhealthy for my kids, but they ask me for it, so I say yes. Government, please help me so that I can tell my kids, sorry, the government won't let you buy cornflakes or won't let you buy chocolate bars or whatever it might be. Like, that's insane. It's just insane. But it's the absolute inevitable logical extension of what we're seeing, that we're going to be basically creating this role for government in our everyday lives. It's just, and at the end of the day, like, what valid role does that leave for parents ever? Like, if the government's going to be educating your kids, feeding your kids, controlling what your kids can say and do, maybe it controls what your kids wear. I don't know. Like, maybe it's like, oh, it's unfair or inequitable for people to have nice clothes and bad clothes. So there's just one set of clothes now. The government's going to regulate what, your kids are just wear uniform all the time. It sounds silly, but it's not.
I guess that's probably the biggest fear around these digital IDs that I have, Jordan, because we can sort of see it playing out. Like, first comes the digital IDs, and then comes central bank digital currencies, and then we have social credit scores, and we remove access to freedom of speech, opposing ideas. That sounds like what China's got at the moment. They're already building and working towards 15-minute cities here in Australia. I believe Perth is becoming a 15-minute city. But that seems like the agenda that they're marching towards. We know who everyone is, where everyone is, how they're interacting. And then with the central bank digital currencies, they can see every single thing that they're buying. They can buy a very good profile. Like, was it Big W or like one of the major online retailers knew that a 15, 16-year-old girl, this was ages ago, was pregnant before she even did, due to her buying habits with as central bank digital currencies. That ramps up even more. They come out and they give you a quota if you can only eat so much meat per week or whatever, which is an agenda that has been pushed and being seeded in the public consciousness at the moment. They're already pre-programming for that. And then they put people in 15-minute cities. You're like only allowed in certain area. If you go outside those bounds, they can just switch it off, or they can control, or negative interest rates. Is that just I've gone too far down the rabbit hole? And I don't necessarily believe that has to happen. Just currently, everything I can see, it just looks like that's that totalitarian footstep march towards making that happen.
Yeah, and like, you know, people cite 1984 by George Orwell as the sort of ultimate dystopian future, but I actually think Aldous Huxley with The Brave New World is where we're actually heading, where it's like we with delight we choose our own slavery. We enslave ourselves because of our enslavement to our desire for short-term gratification and pleasure and convenience. Because convenience is the new god of the 21st century, right? We're freely giving away so much of ourselves. And I think that if we do end up in a world that looks more like what you're describing, it'll be applauded and celebrated by a lot of people, because like life will be easier and simpler. And, you know, and they'll say, look how convenient, you know, we've got all this, but they won't really appreciate what we're losing, because the reality is many people in the world today aren't equipped to get the most out of and enjoy the freedoms we have. You know, they're being comprehensively let down at every stage, and they're not being given the opportunity to develop critical thought, to develop initiative, to develop imagination. Like that's something that we're creating a reality for ourselves that is very shallow, rather than the rich sort of deeper world that is there just outside our reach, you know, at our fingertips and outside our comfort zone. You know, like what you said before, you can either be comfortable or you can be growing, and you can't be both.
One of my mentors when I was 16, 17 said, Sean, when you step outside your comfort zone, you step into your potential. And I've run with that. Every time I want to get to a new level or change something in my life, I have to be uncomfortable. But what you were saying before reminds me of that old saying, good times create weak men create hard times create strong men. Well, we've had a good time, and it looks like we're starting to go into that weak man. And what you're saying about Brave New World, it does seem like, I'm not saying the WEF controls Australia, but a lot of these agendas feel like they're coming from the WEF, the United Nations, the Paris Agreement, climate change, central bank digital currencies being pushed. Is there, first question, and like I'd like to know, like how close are we with the WEF and the United Nations? And if they say, like, boo, do we jump, or are we still like a free-thinking nation and we have people that are willing to put Australia's best interests first for the people?
I think that it's really insidious how these influences grow, because you've got, you know, the Young WEF Global Leadership Program, you've got all of these kind of seemingly benign structures that really build this informal network of global thought, right? So it's not in the literal conspiratorial sense a centrally planned regime, or I don't believe it is. I think, and the main reason I don't believe it is because I've been around politicians and government enough to know they're just not that. It's far more likely to me, and actually far more terrifying, that there's no actual plan. It's just people acting self-interestedly at a global scale in networks of influence that lead to these homogenous outcomes and these agendas being both pushed and gladly accepted. So I think that it definitely is true that these international three-letter organizations and so on do have an outsized influence and do push a lot of the agendas we're seeing, like misinformation and disinformation is a classic one. The WEF said in their 2024 global risk assessment that the biggest threat to the world in 2024 was misinformation and disinformation. So, like, that's not conspiracy. That's that. I'm a law graduate that reads and studies and critically questions what I'm seeing. And I've read the zero draft of what they had proposed in their pandemic preparedness treaty for the World Health Organization that didn't end up passing because the UK rejected it, the US Congress rejected it in the end at the 11th hour. But in that treaty as well, so we've got WEF saying misinformation, disinformation, biggest threat. WHO including a provision, a clause in this treaty that was going to be a pandemic-related treaty that was basically about vaccine disinformation, misinformation, and would have given governments powers to enforce that. So, like, it's not conspiratorial, it's not crazy. Anyone who sort of shouts down discussion of it and saying they just haven't read or become familiar with, or they don't want to know, or they're being disingenuous. But in terms of, I always think of these things, and I've said this on the Collectivitis podcast. I'll just give them a quick shout out. My friend Pietro and his mates, they do a terrific job. And I had a chat with Pietro about this topic once.
Say the name again of the podcast.
The Collectivitis podcast. So they do basically they say
Collectivitis.
Collectivitis, the disease of collectivism. It's very good. I think you'd enjoy I have some really good guests on, and they sort of talk. It's a couple of mates who sort of have a good dynamic as well. I always like watching podcasts where you can see people actually like each other, because I've sort of learned on YouTube and stuff to really know the difference when it's super produced and not genuine, because you can feel it. But anyway, I said on that this whole dynamic of globalism is actually it's a side effect of another word starting with G that is positive for you and I and for everyone in the world. That's globalization. So globalization is individuals basically being far more sovereign, far more information symmetrical with governments, because it used to be there's huge information asymmetry. The governments knew far more than you did. That's no longer true. Basically freedom of movement, greater wealth creation, all this for individuals. Globalization has been immensely positive because it's basically allowed people to really become far more powerful and potentially powerful. But the response to that by the global elites that used to basically have the world to themselves has been to react and counter-react to that trend of globalization with globalism, which is then basically trying to harness the dragon and try to maintain the control and the ability to set the narrative and benefit from forecasting global trends that they used to enjoy without competition. So globalism, which is undoubtedly a terrible thing and negative for individual citizens here in Australia, is actually a symptom of a trend that I think will ultimately win out. And it probably is a good note to sort of finish on, because it's easy to get depressed and to sort of really, when we're talking about things like the Mad Bill and social media for kids, and get really down and think, how can we fight this? This is just going to happen. The secret is that even if these bills pass, they won't work. They're going to fail. Like they are going to, like, even North Korea and China, like you said, China's social credit system to us from the outside looks like this impenetrable thing. There's this dystopian thing. To the average person in China, they know how to get around it. They know how to express themselves. Iran is the same. If you go behind closed doors in Iran, I've got a few friends who live here who still have family in Iran and go and visit. If you go behind closed doors in Iran, they're drinking wine, they're dancing, they're like celebrating their culture. It's not possible to stop the signal. The government is actually the impotent, powerless one trying to put thumbs in the damn wall of progress. We saw that in the US election. There's only so much they can do. They will ultimately fail, even if it looks like it's hopeless and all hope is lost. So we can keep fighting and we will win. It's inevitable. But we just have to go through this kind of crucible first.
Yeah. And I think that's very exciting because we've gone from good times to weak men. Now it's an opportunity for people to stand up and face the hard times and go through it. I've got a video that I want to bring up, Jordan, like with this information bill, and ultimately, like, I believe there's a solution. The solution's Bitcoin and the sovereignty that allows. And, you know, everyone watching the channel, I focus all on Bitcoin. I've brought Jordan on. We've had a couple of conversations. I think Bitcoin can lead to freedom, sovereignty and stuff, but it's nice to know what is going on and to know there's other options. But coming back to this mad bill, I want to play this clip. If they push ahead with it, could it affect how safe we are as a country from like a from like a national security interest? I'll play the video. Let's listen to what JD has to say. I'd love to get your thoughts on it, and hopefully it creates a little bit of pushback here in Australia.
It's insane that we would support a military alliance if that military alliance isn't going to be pro-free speech. I think we can do both, but we've got to say American power comes with certain strings attached. One of those is respect free speech, especially in our European allies. Like, look, I'm not going to go to some backwoods country and tell them how to live their lives, but European countries should theoretically share American values, especially about some very basic things like free speech. It's insane
Let me
that we would
pause that. What are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, I think that the election of Donald Trump and the sort of people that he's putting in around him is going to be like, it's a big course correction. It's a big change from where the Albanese government thought they were going to be globally. And one really interesting question too has to be, how much did the former Biden-Harris regime have to play in the crafting of this kind of legislation and in pushing for it? And that may well come to be revealed in the not too distant future, as we saw when Elon bought then Twitter, now X. A lot of stuff came out, and we're going to be having new people in power in America with potentially very different views on things, and we may well learn more about how much coordination and cooperation there has been behind the scenes with this stuff. I think that Australia strategically and geographically occupies a pretty important place for America, and I don't think they'd ever leave us out to dry as things stand. I think that I said before the election, either way the election went, we really need to seriously think about what our national interests are in relation to America, and that they're not the same. You know, our national interest is not just identical to the US national interest. And
Yep.
So often in the past, we've gotten caught up being the deputy sheriff in the region, and it's sort of been what's good for America has been assumed to be what's good for us. We've got Pine Gap, which is a US CIA asset intelligence base in Northern Territory, and we're basically spying on the region for the US. And like, it's not clear to me that's necessarily in our best interest as a national interest question. So I think that we do have to be aware of how this makes us look to the world. Like, we will be joining North Korea in kinds of things that citizens can see and access. And it might be that, like, because here's the other thing, we don't know what Elon's going to do if this social media ban for under 16s passes. What if he just says GFSY or GFYS? Like, what if he just says, you know what, I'm not going to do it, and you can either access X through Starlink or not access X at all in Australia? Like, that would be pretty exciting to me. That would be a real Atlas Shrugged thing of like, because Elon's shown he's really happy to go toe to toe with the government over their claimed powers for e-safety. Like, how cool would it be if the government passed this social media ban and Elon just said, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to basically do the things you require me to do to operate in Australia. And
it'd be interesting. Like, Elon has stood up hardcore to e-safety Karen, the commissioner, and Anthony Albanese there. I'm just going to see if I can bring up the video of it. Elon e-safety. But like Elon said over and over again, wherever he is, he pays respects to the laws of that country. But yeah, does he just pull the pin and be like, yeah, access or not? It'd be amazing. I'm on Starlink. I think it's absolutely amazing. Telstra.
It's funny you say that, so I'm looking at it very, very closely. Yeah,
Just get it.
Really,
just get it. I waited far too long, bro. It is absolutely amazing. Like our internet, our upload speeds like 5x, our download speeds like 10x on what we had, maybe more. It's insane. It's crazy. It's so amazing.
Every time I talk to you, you get me to adopt something new. So it's good. I like having these conversations because you're just like, just do it. So yeah, got myself on Bitcoin, get myself on Starlink. Got me like, sure, on ground zero.
Yeah, it's like there's so much going on. Like you know, both my wife and I work from home. I think Bitcoin is the most important thing. So to be able to stream and then do the other things that we're doing, having good internet so important. And that's what like pisses me off so much about this misinformation, disinformation bill and the 16-year-old ban. Like we live in an information age, a technology age. Like everything is found on the computer, and maybe that's just an interaction with an AI program, but to be able to learn that at such a young age, that's a superpower. And to want to take that away or stop people having conversations and stuff, definitely I'm going to go down the rabbit holes to be able to find ways to be able to like protect myself. And I think like, you know, I'd like to bring up my channel partner because they're absolutely amazing. It ties into this conversation, Jordan. The Bitcoin way. So with Bitcoin, what I was getting at with it, when you own the money, like who controls the money controls the world. So if you don't have your own money, if it's a central bank digital currency and the government are controlling you like on every level, what you can and can't spend, where you can and can't go, that's hard. So Bitcoin in self-custody is your own money. It allows freedom. If you want to buy more than you like WEF meat quota or whatever for the week, you can do that. The second thing is like protecting your devices, your online privacy. This is a question that somebody here wrote asking you as well. Like, and I want to come back to the question in regards to VPNs with the under 16s. But then the third step is getting a second residency, just having a plan B, just in case. The first 30 minutes is free. You can reach out to them below. But how that comes into the conversation, Jordan, is there are tools, like it's technology, it's an information age. And it looks like the government can see, not even the government, just say there's like two forces. There's control or there's decentralization. Like both of them exist right now. And for me, people on a Bitcoin stand, the decentralized side is winning. It's better. It's aligned with truth. It's fair. It's harder. You need to take 100% self-responsibility. But like when you start doing the hard things and you do them for a consistent period of time, for anyone new to Bitcoin, just do what you can for 4 years. Thank me later. Read the books, you know, Bitcoin evangelism, beers for Bitcoin, whatever. Like just get the information, understand why it's so important. So that's like the hard thing. And then your life gets incredibly easy, very rewarding. But whoever's in control at the moment can see that happening. So they're like ramping up these efforts more and more and trying to make it more and more draconian. But I also agree with you. Like the fight is not lost. Hope is not lost. Because these things are sort of getting pushed through, but there's still an opportunity to stop them. Like what can people do? Like there's a conversation like this, we can get more awareness out like that. That's great. We can sit down, we can go to the pub and be like, yeah, you know, screw the government. They're totalitarian. I don't want this. But what can people actually do?
Yeah, I think like, you know, it's a hard one because like I enjoy just chatting and talking without getting politics into it. But I am running for the Senate, and that is, I'm not doing that because for me, being a senator is like the epitome of what I could achieve or the highest, you know, like I think in many ways it's probably limiting things I could otherwise do and the career I could otherwise have. But I'm doing it because too many good people say, well, no, I'm not ready. It's not the right time. There's no point. And what that does is it just guarantees that these people win and that we keep getting politicians we deserve, frankly. So I think the first thing people could do is get involved, do your own research, see what's out there, in the Bitcoin space here in Australia, the Libertarian Party are the only movement that is saying we're not going to charge capital gains tax on Bitcoin. We're
Let's go.
very close. Yeah, we're very close now to introducing other things, policies around enabling Bitcoin miners to access the energy network to support nuclear energy, hopefully in the future.
That'd be so good for Victoria because your energy grid's fucked.
Oh, mate, 100%. So there's lots of exciting things on the horizon. So getting involved, at the end of the day, if you're not interested in politics, eventually politics becomes interested in you. And there's so many Australians who have been on that journey in the last couple of years, and the time to be on the barricades is now. So whether it's the Libertarian Party, whether it's others, whatever you choose to do, but get active, get aware, and get involved. Because if you're sort of sitting on the sidelines and you're in your bunker, yes, that's good for you, but any bunker or any sort of castle in a siege eventually gets overwhelmed because you lose the ability to have strategic initiative and to shape the world around you and the environment around you. So we're also doing a petition at the moment that I'm actually going to physically print and take with me when I go up to Canberra in the last sitting week of the Senate in a couple of weeks' time. So that's from the 25th of November through to that Thursday of that week. I think that if the misinformation, disinformation bill does get through to the Senate and gets debated, it will be during that time. So I'll be able to sort of try to get there and physically present a bit of a visual, physical symbol of like people's disaffection with this if I'm up there. So, but yeah, basically just keep asking questions, keep being involved, and I think this election really is an opportunity to send a message to both major parties that we've just had enough. Because we're lucky here in Australia, we've got a preferential system. You can vote for a minor party without risking your vote being wasted in other ways if you also have a strong view about who you prefer to be governing you. But I think if you've been watching this show this morning, you should be walking away with big questions in your mind about whether it matters which major party ultimately forms government.
Yeah. What I would love is just for 4 years, if we could get the two major parties out just for 4 years, even if they come back in and just give us a bit of a breather, just to be able to slow things down and just this rapid escalation, because it is ramping up. Like I got a couple of comments here. I'll pull them up. Like Shane at the start, like, can you ask whether it's even legal? I guess that's the point of them jamming these things through the MAD bill and the ban to make it legal to do something that seems so absurd. What's your take?
Yeah, so Shane might be asking, like, do we have any constitutional protections or any freedoms from this kind of legislation? And unfortunately, in Australia, the answer right now is no. The Libertarian Party supports a US-style Bill of Rights federally, that we think that there should be restrictions on what government can make laws about. That's not the case at the moment, and there's only very, very flimsy protections for implied freedom of political communication, which is very, very weak and very unreliable for preventing these kinds of government overreach. So Australia, unfortunately, we're, unlike other parts of the world, we're very, very vulnerable to politicians sort of undertaking these kind of activities. So I wish it weren't so, Shane, but unfortunately, it is within their power.
Yeah, I don't.
That's a great question.
Yeah, like what are your thoughts in regards to VPNs?
That's a terrific question, because I actually think that looking ahead, because I always, like, this is just sort of how I'm wired anyway. I'm always playing 4D chess and trying to think, ahead. But I think that when it comes to VPNs, I think that will absolutely be the next focus of the government in terms of online censorship. I can see a war on VPNs coming. I would be shocked because what will happen is, I don't know if you remember when there was the stabbings in Sydney and there was the whole e-safety versus X thing where Elon was, they were trying to get him to take down the videos of the Archbishop getting stabbed. One of the arguments that the E-Safety Commission made about why it wasn't good enough for them to just do it in Australia was that they said, people are using VPNs to see it overseas. So the E-Safety Commission already knows that people are finding ways around their net. So that is why I think that will absolutely be the next sort of battlefront, because they're basically going to be saying, well, because you can imagine it, right? And I hate doing this because it just chills me how they think, but they'll go like, Sean, why do you need a VPN? if you have nothing to hide, why would you want to be outside our gates? That's what
Yeah.
they'll say VPNs are only for criminals, for
Yeah.
pirates, for thought crime. That is, I wish that wasn't exactly what they'll say, but this hopefully will
That
be
is.
reported. And people can come back to it in 4 or 5 years when it's the war on VPNs. They'll go, geez, Jordan was right.
Yeah.
But I just think that's absolutely the attitude they'll take. Yeah. So at the moment, I think VPNs are a great way. I think everyone should be. VPNs aren't foolproof. Tor's obviously the optimal way. But yeah, I think Starlink, VPNs, Tor, that sort of stuff is what all Australians should be doing.
I completely agree. Jordan, what I want to do is bring out full screen. If you can let people know like where to get in contact, what petitions they can sign, who they can reach out to, like just a couple of action steps, go through as much as you possibly can, give a good list, and then I'll be back in a sec. But the floor is yours, mate. Just the message for people. We're at a pretty interesting time in Australia's history and there's still hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to find out more, like obviously these kind of chats are a bit limited in time. You can follow me on socials. So I'm at Dittloff for Senate with the number 4 on X, Jordan Dittloff Libertarian on Facebook and Instagram. So we've got a petition going at the moment for the MAD legislation. We've also got another one for the social media ban for kids. And like I was saying to Sean earlier, the social media ban for kids worries me more because both of the major parties are wholeheartedly on board. And so, we're really the only party consistently arguing for freedom of speech. So other than that, you can find out where your local libertarian branch meets and you can come along and meet the people. Because at the end of the day, an organisation can say whatever it wants about what it believes and who it is. And I know the Bitcoin community are very much about verifying rather than simply trusting and taking people's word for things. And I think that's an eminently sensible approach when it comes to politics as well. So you can look up on libertarians.org.au and find if there's a branch nearby you or a meetup nearby you, and you can go along and check it out. And I know Bitcoiners are doing that already because I've met a number of them at branch meetings who have done exactly that, where they've sought us out and come along and basically seen what we're about. So yeah, other than that, just keep being vocal. A lot of the crossbench senators have been complaining that their staff have been getting bombarded by phone calls and they've got to dedicate staff to reading emails and answering messages and stuff. That's great. That makes me very happy. So yeah, just keep up the fight, keep thinking critically, and just refuse to be boxed in by this kind of censorship.
Mate, I love that. For everyone, once we're finished live, I'll put a couple of Jordan's links in the description as well. Definitely connect with the man. One thing, because this is a Bitcoin podcast, so just urge everyone, if you're tuned in for the misinformation, disinformation, bill and the information, Bitcoin truly is a cheat code to life. It's at all-time highs. Historically, over Bitcoin's 16-year period, it's never been this... People would say expensive, and I'll bring the chart up and show everyone what I mean. Just, it's at 87,967. The all-time high is like 92,000, 93,000 US dollars, $140,000 Australian. One thing with Bitcoin is they are bringing out central bank digital currencies. They're bringing out digital IDs, things like this. When you hold Bitcoin and you learn to hold it in self-custody, which is basically a device that looks like a USB, no government institution, entity can ever get in the way of spending that money. They can't stop you spending that money, sending it anywhere, like whether it's from me to Jordan or anywhere around the world. If you want to be able to buy more meat or whatever it is, they can't debase it. Like the money printing that's gone on, they doubled the money supply in the last 4 years globally. That's going to continue to happen. The financial markets aren't very safe. There's a reason that the banks are donating millions of dollars in donations to be able to get things in here where we can't talk about how bad it is. Please just take the time to understand what it is at, $140,000 Australian. It is still cheap. But Bitcoin is very volatile. So it goes up and down daily a lot. Like it's down a couple of $1,000s today. Tomorrow it's probably up a couple of thousand. It's moved up $20,000 US. in the last week. But when you zoom out, it moves up and to the right. So it increases in value. Under $100,000, one day people are going to wake up. It'll be $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. That's not going to happen overnight. But say over the next 5 to 10 years, as the world becomes potentially more controlling, or maybe it goes more decentralized, Bitcoin regardless is going to keep going up. So please just take the time to also study that and see like what is going on in the wider world, because not all hope is lost. There's options to be able to opt out if things get very bad, or if you've got some purchasing power behind you and you've got some time, then you can go and you can fight and you can push back against these things. But Jordan, I really look forward to hearing what the Libertarian Party says in regards to Bitcoin. I love that no capital gains. That'd be absolutely amazing. We are starting to see like the shift around the world. Javier Milei getting in, the Libertarian president. Like not all hope is lost. And like I'll have conversations with normies here in Australia, and they're like, Javier Milei is absolutely crazy. But it takes a crazy person to create change. And that crazy person doesn't need to be there for the next 20 years, but just to be able to shift something for a period of time allows people to reset and see, oh, there are other options. It doesn't need to be this way. Right or wrong, it doesn't really matter. But if we're just doing the same thing, we're going to continue to get the same result. Or if they like ramping up their effort, you can see they're moving quicker towards whatever outcome they want. Like we've got an opportunity here. But any final closing thoughts for anyone?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that Australia, like the thing, because we're so connected to the world information-wise now, we're so much more aware of what's going on in the UK, what's going on in the US. But in terms of like what actually happens here in Australia, Australia historically has sort of been about 10 years behind. So that's exciting because you can see what's coming if you're paying attention to trends in the US and stuff. And that tells me that, you know, we're looking at what's happening in Argentina, we're looking at what's happening in the UK, the US, like we're going to be getting that positive trend towards decentralization. It will be coming our way. It'll take time. But, you know, I'm trying to be at the vanguard of that. I'm trying to be paddling to be ahead of the wave. So, yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah, no, Jordan, I absolutely love what you do. I truly appreciate it. And we'll make another stream happen shortly.
No worries, mate. Talk soon.
Thanks, everyone. I'll see you on Monday. Do something nice for yourself, for somebody else. Share the video. Give us a like if you enjoyed. Peace.